for listeners concerned with sensitive content. I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere contains this stern warning.
Do feel free to edit out any of my waffling.
Support for I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere comes from MX Publishing, with the largest catalog of new Sherlock Holmes books in the world. New novels, biographies, graphic novels, and short story collections about Sherlock Holmes. Find them at mxpublishing.com.
And listeners like you who support us on Patreon or Substack, sign up for exclusive benefits at patreon.com/ihearofsherlock or ihearofsherlock.substack.com.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 291. Luke Barton as Sherlock Holmes.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became astronomer.
In a world where it's always 1895, it's I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we interview authors, editors, creators, and other prominent Sherlockians on various aspects of the great detective in popular culture.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Bert Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
Well, welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm
Sure
Bert
you
Wolder.
are. And are you ready to Luke into things? I just know.
Luke.
I don't know.
I need to Barton a more favorable interchange with you. I'll trade you this bottle of ink.
It's probably about as much as I'm worth right now. Well, this is going to be a fun episode. It's not often we get to speak with actors who have played Sherlock Holmes, whether it's on the small screen, the large, or on stage. And it is the latter in which we focus ourselves this time, as we're going to be speaking with Luke Barton. We'll tell you a little bit more about Luke in just a moment. Meanwhile, just wanted to remind you that you can find the show notes for the episode at ihearofsherlock.com, and you can find links for everything we're talking about in the show notes, however you happen to listen to us, whether it's on YouTube or SoundCloud or Apple Podcast or Spotify. The show notes are your friend. They also include links to support us on Patreon and Substack. That's ihearofsherlock.substack.com and patreon.com/ihearofsherlock. All of our supporters get the opportunity to listen to bonus content, and we will have bonus content today for this episode. Extra content and conversation with Luke that is well worth tuning in for as little as $1 a month. You can be part of that. And we also have some thank you gifts for our Patreon supporters as well. So check that out if it suits you, and check all of our social links out there in the show notes. Oh boy, Bert, it sounds like it's all the news that we fit in this episode. What do we...
And we can't print it either.
It is desirably unprintable. What do we have from the news bag?
Well, there's continuing interest on the internet about the new cast of the new Amazon Prime program, Young Sherlock. And what they've announced is that Joseph Fiennes, who is known for The Handmaid's Tale, and Natasha McElhone from Designated Survivor have signed up to play Sherlock Holmes' parents in this new series, which is being pushed forward by Guy Ritchie. He's producing it for Amazon. Fiennes plays Silas Holmes, Sherlock's dad, a self-made scientist, explorer, and businessman. And Natasha McElhone plays Cordelia. Interesting Shakespearean name there, Cordelia. Sherlock's mother She is an artist, the pillar of the household. Holmes himself is played by Finn's Tiffin. And Holmes is apparently at Oxford, involved in a murder mystery and, unsurprisingly, a huge conspiracy. And that will be available on Prime Video.
It should be interesting. I mean, we've had a lull in Sherlockian entertainment as far as movies go for a while, except for Enola Holmes. Those have been steadily churned out. So this is an interesting entry in the series. And this is not a remake of Steven Spielberg's Sherlock Holmes. This is from the novel series by Andy Lane. So that'll be fun.
And then here in New Jersey, the Cape May stage presents the New Jersey premiere of Ms. Holmes and Ms. Watson, Apartment 2B, from July 17 to August 25th. It's written by Kate Hamill. It's set in post-pandemic London of 2021, a modern female comedic reimagining of Arthur Conan Doyle's classic detective team of Watson and Holmes. Here, Sherlock Holmes and Joan Watson.
Oh, that sounds like fun. Obviously something the Cape May Capers will find their way to. Well, you don't need to travel to New Jersey for this one. This is online. Mike Homer, a member of the BSI, will speak at the Last Tuesday Society on the adventures of Arthur Conan Doyle and his spirit guide, Phineas. That'll take place... I've got conflicting information. I see both November 7th and October 6th. Looks like November 7th is the most up-to-date on the website. We'll have a link directly to the Eventbrite. And I think tickets are just $5, so it's a nominal fee. But Mike is going to be using previously unpublished material to explore the seances where Phineas appeared to Conan Doyle's home circle. Mike has written about Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes for the BSI Press and many scholarly journals. And this is part of the Last Tuesday Society, as I said, which is headquartered at the Victor Wynd Museum of Curiosities, Fine Art, and Natural History in London. There we go. And Bert, you'll be making an appearance on the road in Minneapolis, the Norwegian Explorers Conference, Sherlock Holmes at 50. 50? He seems older than that. It's the golden anniversary of the Sherlock Holmes collections there at the University of Minnesota Libraries and the Friends of the Sherlock Holmes collections. This will be featuring a number of Sherlockian speakers, including Mark and Joanne Alberstadt, Erica Dowell, Matt Hall, Jeff Hatcher, Jim Hawkins, Les Klinger, Stephen Chan Lee, Max McGee, Ira Matetsky, Emily Maranker, Rebecca Romney, Will Walsh, and Bert Wolder.
Yeah, actually, I'm just bringing the coasters for the water glasses.
Somebody had to.
I'm like adjusting the microphones.
Perfect. So what are you going to be talking about?
Frederick Dorr Steele.
Perfect.
A Life Beyond the Brushstrokes, A Life in Two Acts, about the life of Frederick Dorr Steele and what we might learn from it.
Superb. Well, the next time we gather back here at this place, the conference will have happened. So we'll be looking forward to hearing more. And I would imagine, as the intrepid reporter that you are, you'll be bringing back some audio clips and insights for people.
I was going to use my shorthand notebook, but if you really want the audio, I suppose.
We could make your shorthand notebook notes available to our paying subscribers. That would be fun.
I like that. That's good.
And for an extra fee, we'll include the solution key so they can actually understand it. That'll be good.
That's a great idea.
Well,
in fact, I think we should send that to everyone who doesn't donate.
You're in trouble. Threatening.
Yeah.
Well, if you know of any items of Sherlockian news that you think we should cover, send it our way at comment@ihearofsherlock.com. We would be delighted to hear from you. We're going to close up the news bag here and transition into the next phase of the show. Okay, well, this next phase is, it's a little self-serving, but not. As many of you know, we have a regular around these parts, and as much as we should have irregulars, we have a regular in the form of Erik Deckers. Erik is a writer by trade. He does a lot of comedy writing. His comedy blog, The Laughing Stalk, is featured across the United States. It's syndicated in many places. We'll have a link to Erik's blog in the show notes. But Erik did a bit of writing for us because he said and we stated up front to a lot of people, he said we reminded him of the Car Talk brothers, Click and Clack. For those of you who aren't familiar with this duo, they started in the 1970s and eventually became syndicated across NPR, running their show until, I think, the early 20-teens when they retired it. But it was a call-in show where people would, they'd ring up Tom and Ray, Click and Clack, the Tappet brothers, and they would inquire as to what their solutions might be for various car problems. And so Erik does some writing for another podcast called Canned Meat Theater. And we were lucky enough to participate in the recording session of Erik's masterpiece here, and it just ran on the latest episode of Canned Meat Theater, and we thought we'd like to share it with you here. Hello and welcome to Crime Talk on NPR with us, Mycroft and Sherlock Holmes, better known to the bums in Harvard Square as Clue and Clog, the Trespass Brothers. We're here to talk with you about crime repair, and the answer to last week's locked room mystery. We're broadcasting this week from the Strangers Room of the Diogenes Club, where their motto is shh.
Each week, my brother Mycroft and I take your calls about your unusual and perplexing cases and help you solve them.
So if you want to call with a question about your case or anything else for that matter, the number here is 8-CRIME TALK. That's 827-463-8255. Hello, you're on Crime Talk.
Gentlemen, this is Charles Garrett, long-time listener, first-time caller.
Hello, Charles.
What can we do for you, Mr. Garrett?
I was hired for a job where I was asked to copy the London phone directory into a notebook for 8 hours a day, and I've been doing it for nearly 2 months. But now I've started to feel this is a little bit fishy.
Tell me, Mr. Garrett, what do you normally do for a living?
I'm an executive consultant, and I work from home most days, but this job requires me to work from an office on the other side of town, which takes me an hour each way. I leave my house at 8 a.m., and I don't return until well past 6 p.m.
This reminds me of one of your past cases, Sherlock, where the pawn shop owner was tricked into leaving his shop each day so the criminals could tunnel into the bank next door.
I was thinking that very thing. Tell me, Mr. Garrett, is your wife attractive?
Oh, very much so, yes. She's quite a bit younger, quite the beauty, and I consider myself very lucky to have married her, especially since I'm in my 60s and I was never much to look at to begin with.
I see. And are you rich?
Oh, at the risk of sounding immodest, I retired after I made a lot of money in the stock market, and now I work as a consultant to alleviate the boredom.
Your wife is cheating on you, Mr. Garrett.
Sherlock.
Well, all the signs are there. An elderly troglodyte with a lot of money.
Hey!
He's tricked into leaving the house every day at the same time for nearly 9 hours.
Oh, I see. And you suspect that she and her lover...
Or lovers.
Oh, God.
Or lovers are conspiring to get him out of the house for several hours a day.
Absolutely. She's probably even paying Mr. Garrett out of his own bank account.
My God, how could I be so stupid? What should I do?
Mr. Garrett, I recommend you hire a private investigator and contact a divorce attorney before things go too much further.
Thank you, Charles, and good luck.
But how do I...
The number here is 8-CRIME TALK. That's 827-463-8255. Hello, you're on Crime Talk.
Hello, my name is Heather Featherlight. Long time, first time.
Hello, Heather.
Hello, Heather. How can we help you?
I've been hearing some strange noises from the condo above me, and I worry that someone is being tortured.
Interesting. You hear these sounds mostly at night?
No, that's the interesting thing. They only happen intermittently during the day, usually between 9 a.m. and 6:30 p.m.
And what kind of sounds are these?
They're a kind of moaning sound.
Moaning like a ghost?
No, more like someone is in distress or is being poked repeatedly with some sort of instrument.
Fascinating. Are these long moans of pain and agony?
Sherlock.
No, they're short, repetitive moans, almost rhythmic. Oh, and there's occasionally shrieking.
Sherlock.
And sometimes it sounds like the person is praying, as if she's calling out to God for deliverance.
This is very interesting. Heather, could you imitate the moans?
Sherlock!
Quiet, not now.
Actually, I've recorded them with my phone and I can play them for you.
Excellent.
Sherlock!
What?
Do not continue this conversation.
But Heather was going to play.
Absolutely not!
What's the problem?
Don't you want to hear the ghostly moans?
Certainly not. This is a family show.
Oh, wait. Something's happening upstairs now. I heard a door slam. Now it sounds like someone is shouting, like two men and a woman. Now a woman is screaming something about... Oh, my God!
Heather, by chance, are your upstairs neighbors Mr. or Mrs. Charles Garrett?
I believe so.
Not for much longer.
Why? What do you mean?
Well, you've done it again. You've squandered away another perfectly good hour listening to us. We'd like to thank our esteemed producer, John Brandy Snifter, Suitcase Lifter, Aimless Drifter, Wide Load Shifter Watson. Our director of Magnifying Glass Maintenance is Luke Atme. And our director of Close-Up Magic is Howsy Doodat. We're Clue and Clog, the Trespass Brothers. Thanks for listening. And don't solve crimes like my brother.
And don't solve crimes like my brother.
We'll be back next week.
Good night.
Well, that was really something, you elderly troglodyte.
Yeah. That was a lot of fun. You sound very good. I like your Boston accent.
Lots of experience there, I can say. Well, that was featuring yours truly as Mycroft, Bert as Mr. Garrett, Paul Singleton as Sherlock Holmes, and Tony Deckers as Heather Fleming. And it was written by Erik Deckers. So thank you very much, Erik, for putting that together and entertaining, well, at least us. I can't claim that anyone else is, but I'm sure they are. If you haven't been to the MX Publishing site in a while, well, you need to get over there and check out the new material. They are always cranking out new books, and May, April, and into June have lots to choose from. For example, this month we have Sherlock Holmes Eliminate the Impossible, in which Paula Hammond collects 6 pseudo-canonical tales, where we find Holmes and Watson encountering mummies, angels, phantoms, invisible assassins, and, well, maybe it's not exactly what it might appear. And then, in May, Mrs. Hudson for the Defense finds Sherlock Holmes coming back to London from the Sussex Downs to help out Inspector Lestrade and his ally, former landlady Mrs. Hudson. Dr. Watson, it seems, has been accused of murder. Throw in Thomas Wiggins, a junior printer who used to be the head of the Baker Street Irregulars, and you've got an interesting and rollicking story. And finally, on May 22nd, to celebrate the birthday of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, it's the second edition of The Monographs, Becoming Sherlock Holmes. The first set was comprehensive, but an introduction to the world of thinking like Sherlock Holmes. From looking at the practices of neuroscience, we can develop our own emotional control and sharpness of our minds, just like Sherlock Holmes. Ben Cardall takes us through all of that in this second edition. So browse around at mxpublishing.com, find what suits your reading needs, and envelop yourself in Sherlock Holmes stories today. Luke Barton trained at the Oxford School of Drama. Since his studies, Luke has acted in multiple theatre productions in London and across the UK, including Romeo and Juliet, Henry V, Midsummer Night's Dream, Twelfth Night, Busman's Honeymoon, The Unexpected Guest, One Man, Two Governors, and Jeeves and Wooster. He's played both Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson in The Hound of the Baskervilles, Sherlock Holmes in The Sign of Four, and most recently returned as Sherlock Holmes in Black-Eyed Theatre's touring production of The Valley of Fear. Luke is also an active audiobook narrator. You can hear him narrating a number of titles from MX Publishing, including Jeremy Brett is Sherlock Holmes. Luke will be playing Mr. Darcy and others in Pride and Prejudice at the German Street Theatre from August 19th through September 7th of this year. Luke Barton, welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure. So we begin the interviews with friends of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere the same way, so we're going to bless you with it. How did you first meet Sherlock Holmes?
Well, I vividly remember an incident at school where I think because I'd seen sort of old film versions of Holmes in the background, probably with my dad watching them or something like that, I was utterly convinced that he was a real person. And I remember being asked, this is primary school, very young, by the way, and it wasn't, late in my education, but I remember being asked by a teacher about whether or not Sherlock Holmes was a real person. They were sort of going through historical figures and literary figures, and I was sure he was real. So that was my first kind of introduction to the idea that actually he was a incredible character from literature. And then I really started reading Holmes properly when shortly after I finished training as an actor, I was doing a side job and it required me to commute into central London. And somebody said, well, if you're looking for something to read that's great and also, you could definitely read one of these stories in a single journey, really, you should read the Holmes stories. So I did and became obsessed with it from there, really.
So how did you first get into acting?
Yes. Well, I suppose like lots of people really, school plays. I think I got to, I don't know what age it was, 14 or 15, I suppose. My mum decided I was just, loitering around the house a little bit too much. So she gently encouraged me to find some sort of after school club that might, keep me occupied for a bit. And, I actually started off just by offering to kind of paint the sets for the school play that particular Christmas. And luckily or unluckily, I suppose, somebody, I think, had to pull out because they, got injured or something. And they needed an ugly sister for the pantomime that year. So I was moved up from set decorator to ugly sister, and I've never looked back.
Is that a promotion? I don't.
Well, I don't know. I suppose I got some lines, right. My paintbrush was taken away and a script was handed in, given to me. So, but yeah, it was a bit of a, as soon as it happened, as soon as I did one show, I was addicted and, gradually, doing every show I could, started doing some amateur dramatic, local kind of, amateur groups, and then, studying it at GCSE and A-level, and then my teacher said, as we were sort of applying for university, maybe you should think about pursuing this professionally, which I did.
Do you have, in your experience reading Holmes, even at that sort of early stage, did you? What I'm stumbling to ask you is what sort of impression the character on the page made from the standpoint of a character that might be played. Did you pay any attention to it at all, really, or just enjoyed the stories?
I think I enjoyed the stories, but I think the character's so vivid. And I think what the joy of first reading it is the different ways that Holmes comes alive in each story. There's there's obviously the eccentricities and the characteristics that exist with him throughout every story, but I think Watson seems to zoom in on a different aspect of him in every story, so it makes continuing on through the canon such a joy, because you want to see which part of the personality comes out next, what new thing he will do that is compelling and interesting. And I think you get early on this morose, slightly abrupt, quite eccentric, seems to break all the rules of the Victorian society he lives in his manner, but clearly a genius. And then later on, you get something of a hero, and an action hero at that. And I think there's the joy of it the first time is this character building and developing with each new story that you read.
Well, that's a wonderfully crisp and astute assessment of what's going on. It takes some people, there are people who've appreciated that, how the characters progress and how different aspects of their personality are shown. But as an actor, it sounds like you were really looking at that journey too, almost from a standpoint of a toolkit. Did you find that you needed when you began to portray Holmes, did you find you needed a backstory in your head that was different from what was on the page that would be helpful to you?
Well, I think I try not to go too far into backstories. I think they can be helpful, but they can also, I think, be distracting a little. And certainly the very first Holmes story that that I performed in was The Sign of Four, and it struck me that in that story, I wanted my Holmes to be a Holmes that was so kind of rooted in the world of the story. And I think at that time, the BBC, very successful BBC production, which was obviously a modernisation, was there and it was present. And I think a lot of people were coming to see the show, sort of having just recently watched that, and with that modern adaptation very present in their minds. And I sort of wanted to bring a Holmes that I thought was very true to not only the books, but that particular book, and where Holmes and Watson were in that early story and in their, the earlier part of their relationship. But yeah, certainly I did delve into, I can't remember the name of the author now, who wrote that great Mr. Holmes of Baker Street, or I think that's the title of it, but, wrote this really quite fantastic sort of biography of Holmes that, well, I mean, even goes back as far as, Holmes's ancestors, and, some of that can be very helpful for an actor, just to give a sense of the world. And I found one thing that for me was so clear with Holmes was this was a middle-class Victorian gentleman, and that's so wonderful in so many ways. And what's great about that, I think, if for me, capturing that also allowed the fun to be found in when he breaks that etiquette and that formality of that world. So for me, it was great to sort of delve into the idea of these stately homes he might have lived in, and I mean, his brother is the British government. They are part of the sort of Victorian establishment, but therefore it's great when he very much acts outside of that, or what the expectations of that establishment are in terms of behaviour.
Wow.
I think all of that is quite astute, and it I think shows a level of understanding of the character that goes beyond the typical unidimensional Holmes that we see. Just this reasoning machine and someone who just spits out facts and logic. There really is a depth to the character, and it is displayed over time. These stories were written over 40 years, and there's so much that we can infer from it. And incidentally, the book that you were thinking of, it's William Baring Gould's Sherlock Holmes of Baker Street. It's an excellent biography.
It is. It is an excellent biography, and I think that there's. I think I have to admit that playing Sherlock Holmes was by far, so far in my career anyway, has been one of the most, if not, well, no, it has been the most difficult character to portray because he's so complex and he's so rich and varied, and every time I read or reread a story, and I try, any play that I do, if it comes from a novel, I try and read the novel. I try and read it a few times and get a few different sort of takes on it. And every time you read Sign of Four or The Valley of Fear or whatever, you read it a couple of times, and there's always new joyful things to be found in and opportunities for you to sort of play. But at the same time, it makes it very, very tricky because you sort of, I don't know. I always felt like there was so much more I could do at the same time. So yeah, it made it a very tricky character to play.
Yeah. And one of the things that we've, observed over the years is that classically trained actors are typically in a better position to play and to understand Holmes. And you, of course, trained at the Oxford School of Drama, but I'm curious about what other portrayals of Sherlock Holmes you took in and which inspired you and how they were different and how you might use some of those previous inhabitations of the character to inspire your own portrayal.
Yeah, it's another sort of tricky. Every actor will give a different answer to this. I sometimes am a little cautious of with well-known characters often portrayed. I sometimes am a little cautious of watching other people's for fear of going, oh, that's rather nice. Oh, shall I just steal that? Because that's, you don't really want to do that. But and of course, we're spoilt for choice with Holmes because there have been so many wonderful, wonderful portrayals of the character. So I think that sort of led me to go, well, actually then break that habit, delve into as many different performances of Holmes as you can find, and really focus on what aspect of the character they sort of zoom in on. And I think each recent portrayal, or certainly television portrayal, the way that each actor has found something, and it's, as a trained actor, exactly what it is. It's just something that actor's gone, oh, that I find that very interesting or fascinating, or I connect with that, and I think Cumberbatch's Holmes was neurodivergent and wore that very sort of I think transparently. I think Johnny Lee Miller's was an addict, neurotic. I think Downey Jr.'s was almost like a superhero, much more physical, much more kind of aggressive. But I suppose of them all, the one that I thought, this just feels like the Holmes I've read, the one that leaps out of the book, was Jeremy Brett. And perhaps that was because I was interested in also creating Holmes that was very true to the book, and certainly the theatre company I worked for, that's what we wanted to do. I just felt like Brett just brought this man alive in a way that, I thought it was a masterpiece.
Well, it's so interesting to hear you talk about that and how you observe other actors, because in writing, of course, most writers resist reading works by other people when they're in the middle of writing something, because they don't want to be affected by someone else's voice and characterization. They want to do something original, and they want to stay to their own style. But those high-level observations of neurodivergent Holmes and an addict, it's interesting, and it's part of the framework. But I'm curious how you put that to work in voice acting, because there you've got I mean, your toolkit is really your voice that you've got to that has just got to portray the moments, the feelings, the character, and also, depending on what you're doing, you're also creating multiple characters if you're reading a text or bringing other characters into the play. Was that a different process for you to do Holmes from a standpoint of just audio?
Yeah, it is, and it's another challenge again. Actually, I find the challenge of audio is I think because of my theatre experience and having been classically trained and most of the work I've done over the last sort of decade since I left drama school has been theatre. I'm quite a energized physical actor, so bringing that down and channeling those physical impulses into the voice and allowing that to lend different colours has been a real challenge. But also what I think I really love in all of the stories that I've narrated, I've narrated some really brilliant stories with some really great action sequences and explosive sort of near the end of the adventure when it's all coming to a head and there's multiple characters and the police are there and everything's going on that you would hope for in a great Holmes story. But then I think what I love narrating the most is actually those private conversations between Holmes and Watson, and allowing the intimacy of the microphone to really kind of explore that wonderful complex relationship and how differently they are, because that's always been of interest to me, is the Holmes that everybody else sees versus the Holmes that Watson sees in the quiet privacy of Baker Street, and I think audio really lends itself to that.
Yeah, it's a very intimate kind of medium. Well, hey, you don't have to tell us. We understand audio. And for our listeners, MX Publishing actually carries a number of your narrations for some of their books. So we'll have a link so people can check those out, including Maureen Whitaker's Jeremy Brett is Sherlock Holmes, which is not a Sherlock Holmes story, but it is very much a biography of Jeremy Brett with respect to his portrayal of Sherlock Holmes. It must have been a thrill, a joy for you to read that of your hero.
Yeah, and such a fascinating life. And the great thing about that was, the research that's been put into it, it's really fantastic. And I think I was narrating that in lockdown, and the world was in a very strange and quite worrying place at the time, and particularly theatre. And there was a question mark at one point as to whether theatres would survive. And as an actor, I was kind of going, am I ever going to act again? And the last role I had played was Sherlock Holmes, and I found it, as I've said, a challenge. And reading these very honest confessions by Brett about also how difficult he found approaching the character, and that drive to really get it right, because this character means so much to so many people. I really connected with that, and it was really fantastic to read. So I'm actually going to narrate that. Jeremy Brett is Sherlock Holmes is actually one section, quite a lengthy section, but it's one section of Maureen's much larger biography, and I'm actually going to narrate the rest of it. I think hopefully it'll be out before the end of the year. So I can't wait to sort of also find out about how he approached all the other wonderful characters he got the opportunity to play as well.
Superb. We'll keep an ear out for that.
Are there kinds of characters that you enjoy voicing more than others? And it sounds like, Holmes, for all these reasons, was a dream role. And I'm curious if you have other characters, other dream roles you'd like to perform on stage or from a standpoint of audio? I mean, is there what's your thinking about all that?
Yeah, I think Sherlock definitely is up there with, just the dream role. I think, for all the reasons I've said in terms of its complexity, and I think there's a real privilege, to be honest, in stepping into the shoes of a character that's so popular and so well known, and that other fantastic, great actors have had the opportunity to portray. I think I remember auditioning for the role of Holmes, and I sort of drove there, and I got out, and I thought, am I right for this part? I don't know really. I mean, I'd love to play it, and then I got into the sort of waiting area, and it's always horrible because there's always 50 other actors who look exactly the same as you, and you think, oh God, here we go. All these other people that you're usually in competition with, they're all there looking at you, and one of them. He stood up and he opened his violin case and he started practicing on the violin, and I thought, oh well, I can't play the violin, so I'm not going to get this. So I'll just enjoy the audition.
That's when you pull out your cocaine case.
Yes, imagine. Yes, I'm just going to take this needle into the toilet. I'll be 2 minutes and I'll be right with you. But no, I just thought, well, he's got the part because he can play the violin, and I knew that they wanted to include live music in the production, so I thought, well, this might be the only opportunity you get to play Sherlock Holmes. So, just enjoy the audition, and the audition was the great scene where he analyzes Watson's brother's watch and tells Watson everything he could possibly hope to know and more about it, and it was wonderful. And I thought, well, you know what, if that's the only sort of time I get to play Holmes, great. And then I got the email later on saying, hey, would you like to do it? And I thought, am I going to have to learn the violin? Which luckily I did. But yeah, I mean, in terms of other great parts, I mean, I think my training sort of lent me towards classical work and classical characters, and I recently played Mr. Darcy in a production of Pride and Prejudice, which I'm going to be doing again in London in a few weeks, and that was another fantastic set of characters by a gifted writer that excellent actors before me have portrayed, and I think in any kind of role like that, it's just such a dream and such a pleasure to sort of have your go and make your offer to an audience, and to share in the joy that those audiences have of those characters that they've read and then keep coming back to. And I think Holmes is that character for so many people. It doesn't matter how many television performances of the role they've seen, how many times they've seen that story, you want to see it again. And yeah, it's great to have have the chance to do that.
Yeah. So you've played Sherlock Holmes 3 times on stage. We've got The Sign of 4, which you began in 2018, and then after the stage was brought back, was resuscitated in 2021, you played The Hound of the Baskervilles, and then The Valley of Fear, which was just coming off a touring production earlier this year. But what interests me is the middle of this, The Hound of the Baskervilles. In that production, you got to play both Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, which, interestingly enough, Jeremy Brett played Dr. Watson in The Crucifer of Blood on stage. He didn't play the 2 characters at the same time, though. So talk to us a little bit about that experience of playing both Holmes and Watson, what you brought to each role, maybe how each role helped you see the other character differently, and what that whole experience was like during that production.
Yeah, it was, I mean, I was very, very lucky there. I mean, it was a fantastic production because it was a sort of immersive production. So the conceit of the play was that it was occurring sort of a few months after the events of The Hound of the Baskervilles, but crucially before Watson had written up the case and published it. And the news and rumour of this terrifying ghostly hound was running amok around the country and terrifying the great and good of society. So in order to put everybody's fears to rest and reassure them that all was well, Holmes and Watson invite the Victorian press and the great and good to come to Baker Street, and Watson hopes that he will just simply give a lecture explaining the hound and the events, but of course Holmes doesn't really see it that way and thinks actually the best thing to do is a theatrical retelling of the story. So I got to alternate. I played each week. I did, I think, obviously because of COVID, we had to split the main roles so that just in case an actor went down. So I got to play, I think I did 4 performances. So on one week it would be 3 Holmes, 1 Watson, and then the week after would be 3 Watson, 1 Holmes, and we alternated it week after week like that for the whole run. And it was wonderful because you couldn't have picked a better show for an audience that had been locked down and forced to stay at home and who were therefore absolutely gagging for live theatre and connection and the arts, and a story like The Hound, which is so well known and so popular. The audience, I don't think we could have got a more receptive, open, encouraging audience than we had in that show. And in terms of playing both parts, it was a real gift, because I find Watson just so marvellous, and I think in a way I was lucky because when I did The Sign of 4, I had a fantastic Watson, and he played Watson as this highly intelligent military man, nothing at all like the sort of bumbling fool that he can often be played as. And I thought it was such a fantastic choice at the time. And then I got to have a go myself, and I thought, this guy he's so different to Holmes, but so necessary. He has that sort of emotional connection to people. He has that ability to understand the mood and emotional state of the people that are coming in to speak to Holmes, where Holmes can simply look at the problem and not necessarily be receptive to the sort of emotional consequences of what he's saying. And I think it was also interesting to play both sides of what is a very brilliant and powerful friendship, and to think, why does Watson stay around, when he bless him, has to put up with so much, and particularly in Hound, when he's sent off to that barren moor, thinking that he's, sending back the reports, and Holmes is doing his thing in London, whereas actually he's out there as well. So it was such a great opportunity, and how lucky to be able to play both.
I know there's another production in planning from Black Eyed Theatre, and at this point, it's not certain about the casting or any of the details at this point, but we at least have a title. Sherlock Holmes and the Hunt for Moriarty. It's adapted by Nick Lane. And I don't want to jinx anything, but we've had this progression that you've been in The Sign of 4, The Hound of the Baskervilles, The Valley of Fear. 3 of the 4 novels, and now we have this probably compilation of works from the various places we see Moriarty mentioned. Any hopes, any expectations outside of this production, anywhere you want to take the character of Holmes in the future?
Well, I think I think it's been fantastic to do all the 3 novels. would have been excellent to have started with Study in Scarlet and, complete all the novels. But I think in Valley of Fear, Nick he took a little bit of dramatic license. He included this wonderful scene. He made Moriarty more present than I think he actually is, obviously, in the story. But audiences loved it. Audiences, they could not get enough of it. And that sort of, that rivalry, the menace, the feeling of Holmes meeting his match with Moriarty, I think audiences were so excited by it, and playing it as well, I think would be, a really lovely challenge and a lovely opportunity, because it's one of the great rivalries of literature, isn't it? And I think Moriarty, wonderful character. It would be interesting to explore that, and particularly if Nick sort of uses the start, the source material as a starting point, and goes a little further. Nick is devoted to ensuring, Black-Eyed, are devoted to ensuring that their productions are really true to the novels and to Conan Doyle's work. But within that, Nick also likes to just sort of see where he can just go a little bit further and give the audience a little bit more. So maybe there will be some lovely juicy material in there to play with.
That's wonderful. Yeah, that would be a tremendous seed. You might be the only actor ever to play Holmes, Watson, and Moriarty. That would be a lot.
Well, I'll never say no. I know. I'm
a feather,
some sort of award. Yeah.
Well, thank you for giving us the gift of your Sherlock Holmes on stage and in audio narration. For folks who are interested in hearing more about and from Luke, you can check out his audio recordings on the MX Publishing site. And I want to make sure I get this right, Luke. The upcoming production that you're in London is which?
Oh, I'm doing a Pride and Prejudice at the Jermyn Street Theatre in London from, when am I doing it? 19th of August to the 7th of September. So if any of your listeners find themselves in London and fancy seeing some Austen, come along.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Well, Luke, thank you so much for joining us here on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Thank you very much.
Luke is so eloquent and articulate about his art. I loved his stories, particularly about the audition that he had, and it was such a perfect scene, that scene with Holmes and Watson's watch, because you go from Holmes, it was so beautifully selected, you go from Holmes who's offering an explanation, coming to conclusions, and then his realization that he's injured his friend. And I loved Luke's observation, too, about Holmes as a middle-class English gentleman who breaks etiquette. What a lot of fun to talk to him and find him so thoughtful and articulate about the art that he's devoted his life to.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. He just showed a degree of understanding that is not typically seen with too many Sherlock Holmes portrayers. I think Luke clearly takes this assignment to heart and has inhabited the character. So we are fortunate to be the beneficiaries of his talent. And again, his audio recordings can be heard via MX Publishing. And if you happen to be in the UK, well, we are envious because you get to see him on stage. Oh boy, you know what that is. That's right. It is everyone's favorite Sherlockian quiz show. It's Canonical Couplet, where we give you 2 lines of poetry and ask you to identify which Sherlock Holmes story we are talking about. If you were around here the last time we spoke, you would have heard this clue. The best and wisest man I ever knew still had apparently a trick or two. Bert, do you know which episode we're talking about? Which Sherlock Holmes story we're talking about?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's sort of obvious. That's the story of a mysterious legend in Dartmoor. You know, where Sir Charles is plagued by the sound of exploding sporting equipment. It's the case Watson called the sound of the basketballs.
Ouch. Yeah, not quite. You're just a slight bit off. Slight bit off.
Is your trombone? Your trombone is in the closet. I
Yes,
guess.
once again. No, it's available in post-production only.
Oh, good. Good.
Well, no, that is not what we're going for, and we're going to turn to, as always, our pal Erik Deckers, who helps us out. He says, "Holy crap! I've solved it." It's the story where Sherlock Holmes suddenly appeared back from the dead, causing a most violent reaction in Watson. It's the story Watson called The Adventure of the No Longer Empty Pants. Except that's probably incorrect. The answer is The Adventure of the Empty House. Well, you know what, Erik? I hate to do this to you, but no, you're wrong. The Empty House is the answer a couple of episodes ago. The death of an adventuresome young rake established Watson's paramount mistake. This one is the final problem. The final problem is what we're looking for. So we will go to the bin here. You know, we didn't have as many entries this time because, I don't know if any of you realized this, the first attempt at downloading the last episode ended in a major gap, an audio gap, or it just cut off entirely. And we apologize for that. So we asked people to re-download it. If you didn't happen to get the full episode, just re-download it, and you can get the full episode, where you can listen to the original Canonical Couplet entry for this one, which is probably why we didn't have as many entries this time around. But at any rate, we will bring out the prize wheel, and as usual, we will give it a big spin. Slowing down, landing on number 15, and that looks like it is David Townsend. Oh, well, congratulations. Glad to have you back here again with us, David. We will have, I think it's an item from the Sherlock Holmes vaults, the I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere vaults. So it'll be something exciting, I am sure. Which means now it's time to put on your thinking caps and get ready for this episode's Canonical Couplet. There isn't anybody of that name, but David told the story just the same. If you know the answer to this Canonical Couplet, put it in an email addressed to comment at ihearofsherlock.com with Canonical Couplet in the subject line. If we choose your name at random from all the correct entries, you'll win. Good luck. And once again, we will have something from the iHo's vaults for you. So check it out. Well, now we have our friend Madeline Quinones, who will be joining us for our regular segment here called A Chance of Listening. It's A Chance of Listening with your correspondent, Madeline Quinones.
Hello, everybody. I'm Madeline Quinones, and I am here today to talk about the Three Patch Podcast. Three Patch Podcast got its start in January 2013. The podcast was part of the wave of new Sherlockiana, and Three Patch got its start in between seasons 2 and 3 of Sherlock. And this is actually kind of important. This is when you really saw a lot of people get involved, a lot of creativity. Three Patch is a collective venture. There are quite a lot of co-hosts and contributors, and some of them move on over the years and new ones come in. Three Patch allows its co-hosts to maintain the wall of privacy between their internet lives and their day-to-day lives. There is a distinctly internet fandom sensibility to this podcast. That's not to say that they don't do events. They have been a big part of 221BCon, I think ever since it got started. But they are very strongly internet in flavor. So what exactly does this podcast do? In the beginning, it was all about BBC Sherlock. Nowadays, they talk about more fandom stuff in general and some more Sherlockian, non-Sherlock stuff. Originally, it was pure BBC Sherlock to the point where they even had a mini podcast within a podcast called Spoilercast. This was about being in tune with the filming of seasons 3 and 4 of Sherlock. Some of the Three Patchers were actually in England and got to see some of the filming of those 2 seasons of the show. Three Patch is unique in a couple of ways. One, it is normal for an episode to be 2 hours long, 3 hours long, 4. Yes, a single episode. And the reason why that is, it is not because it is a conversation that just doesn't end. It is a variety show. There are discussions, there are interviews, there are fan fiction recommendations, there are top 10 lists, there are crafting segments. This show has a lot of stuff going on and a lot of people working on it. And this is where the show notes are really your friend, because it's worth your while before listening to an episode to dive into the show notes and find out what all is in it. And there is one other way that Three Patch really distinguishes itself. They decided early on to tackle the elephant in the room. That is explicit fan fiction. And it's a hard thing to talk about. It is worth noting that they also lean strongly, not exclusively, but strongly, towards being very pro John Locke, which is the idea of Sherlock Holmes and John Watson as a romantic couple. If that isn't your cup of tea, I actually still recommend that you give the show a try, because that's not all that there is to it by far, and there is a lot of good and intelligent discussion and analysis. So let's talk about some highlights. Episode 139, their 10th anniversary. That is a good episode to get a strong feeling for what the whole show is like. Basically a much, much longer version of this little talk that I'm giving right here. As far as Spoilercast goes, I recommend starting with episode 1 for once and see if you want to go further with it. I do think that the neat thing about Spoilercast is that if somebody ever decides to write a history of the making of Sherlock, there's probably some very valuable material in the mini show. Another highlight, episode 85, Sherlock is actually a girl's name. This one was really neat because it was about adaptations that gender bend Sherlock and or Watson, like CBS's Elementary with Joan Watson or Miss Sherlock, or adaptations that focus on female characters like Enola Holmes. Last but not least, episode 107, History Has Its Eyes on You. There are episodes of various podcasts, Sherlockian podcasts, that I think are important, that maybe like all Sherlockians should listen to. This episode is one of them. History Has Its Eyes on You. It was recorded summer of 2020 in response to the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests around the country and around the world. And so Three Patch decided to tackle the issue of racism in fandom spaces primarily. It gets heavy sometimes. There's a lot here. The whole episode is really good. If you listen to no other episode of this show, listen to this one. Seriously. And that is a lot now for me to have said about a show that I haven't even finished. Because as long as these episodes are, this is challenging even for me as a mad podcast listener. So I am going to turn you back over now. Thanks, guys.
Well, thank you, Madeline. What a service Madeline's doing for the Sherlockian community. Listening to podcasts so you don't have to. It's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. So since Madeline is listening to podcasts, I don't have to do this one anymore, I guess.
Perfect.
Yes.
I will sit here and talk to myself, which I pretty much do all day anyway.
No.
Yeah. Well, no, this is, like I said, valuable service, really good overview. It can open up new avenues for you, avenues that you might not have known that existed. Maybe it sparks a little curiosity. Maybe you want to turn your nose up at some of them. That's okay. You know, we're all in it for different reasons. And as we've said before, all Sherlock is good Sherlock, just as long as people are having fun and not hurting anyone else in the process, except Professor Moriarty.
Oh, I like that. But you're absolutely right. It is a great service just to preserve and to record what's going on in the media. I don't think anyone else in these media, I don't think anyone else is doing this.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation. So, well, let us know what you think, not only of this show, but of others. We would gladly welcome your comments. You can comment on, certainly on Substack, on Patreon, in the show notes on ihearofsherlock.com, on the particular website where this episode is listed. And, of course, you can email us at comment@ihearofsherlock.com. You can even text us if you feel up to it at 518-952-2125. Or if you want it to be a little easier to remember, it's 5-1895-221-B5. We would be delighted to hear from you in whatever way you'd like to get in touch with us. And if you're looking for us on the socials, we are I Hear of Sherlock everywhere you go. Not I Hear of Sherlock everywhere. We are I Hear of Sherlock everywhere you go. There you go. Goodness gracious. Well, it looks like we have squandered away another hour, just like Clue and Clog.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's fab. We'll never get that 60 minutes back. And friends, our listeners, you now can listen to the whole show all over again, just to make sure you didn't miss anything.
Go back to the start. Yeah, and we have additional conversation with Luke Barton available for you if you are a paying member of our Patreon or Substack community. So make sure you listen there and hear more of our conversation with Luke. Well, until we come back here next time, this is the always overlooked Scott Monty.
And I'm the underappreciated Burt Wolder.
Oh, not here, you're not. And together we say, the game's afoot.
The game's afoot.
You know, I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I'm neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.